The hull breach screamed. Metal shrieked against vacuum as atmosphere vented through a fracture the width of Commander Javik's fist. Emergency klaxons wailed through the Imperial flagship Vathris, their pitch climbing as pressure sensors registered the cascading failure spreading through Engineering Deck 7. Queen Lysara felt the deck shudder beneath her ceremonial boots, the vibration wrong in a way that made her dorsal plates instinctively flatten against her spine. "Your Majesty, immediate evacuation to the royal yacht," Captain Theron announced, his third arm already reaching for the emergency beacon at his chest. "The antimatter containment ring shares structural supports with the compromised section. If those supports fail, how long until catastrophic collapse?" Lysara's voice cut through the alarm with the precision that had held 6 star systems together through 3 attempted coups. "Engineering estimates 12 minutes. Maybe 15 if we vent the entire deck and sacrifice the crew still trapped there." Theron's scales had gone pale gray, the color of death in impossible choices. The Queen's security detail formed a protective wall around her. 7 royal guards in obsidian armor moving with choreographed efficiency toward the evacuation corridor. Their silence was absolute, their discipline perfect. They had trained for this scenario 1,000 times, but none of those simulations included what happened next. A human walked through the emergency bulkhead, not ran. Walked. With a metal toolbox in one hand and what appeared to be a roll of silver material tucked under his arm. His uniform marked him as civilian contractor, 3rd class, the kind of technician who maintained life support in cargo bays and rarely saw the command deck. His name patch read Martinez. He barely glanced at the Queen before turning down the corridor leading directly toward the breach. "Halt." Guard Captain Vex's voice carried the weight of authority that could stop charging war beasts. His particle rifle swung toward the human with practiced ease. "That corridor is sealed by royal decree. Turn back immediately." Martinez paused, turned, and looked at Vex with an expression of such profound irritation that Lysara felt her second heart skip. "There's 93 people trapped past that breach," the human said, his voice flat and utterly devoid of fear. "I can patch it. Move." "The structural engineers have declared the section unsalvageable," Theron interjected, stepping forward. "Even if you reached the breach, our best materials require specialized equipment and—" "I don't need your best materials." Martinez held up the roll of silver material. "I need 4 minutes and for everyone to stop talking." She had ruled through war, famine, and betrayal by reading the spaces between words, the truth hidden in body language. This human's pupils were dilated, his breathing elevated but controlled. His hands showed old burn scars and fresh cuts. He was terrified but functional. And he genuinely believed he could fix an impossible problem with whatever was in that box. "Captain Terran, what is that material?" she asked. Theron's scales rippled with confusion. "It appears to be industrial-grade bonding tape, Your Majesty," commonly called duct tape by humans, used for temporary repairs on non-critical systems. "It has no structural integrity rating for hull breaches. It would be utterly insufficient." "It'll hold long enough to get everyone out," Martinez interrupted. "Then you can evacuate and let your fancy engineers figure out the permanent fix." The deck shuddered again. Somewhere deep in the ship's bones, something vital groaned. "You are suggesting," Lysara said slowly, "that you can repair a breach threatening an antimatter containment system with adhesive tape." "I'm suggesting I can buy you 20 minutes instead of 12. Martinez's jaw tightened. "Your Majesty." The honorific came as an afterthought, tacked on with barely concealed impatience. 2 of the royal guards shifted forward, an unconscious response to the breach in protocol. Lysara raised one hand, palm out, freezing them in place. She had not survived 40 years of rule by ignoring instinct. "Guard Captain Vex, escort this human to the breach site. Render whatever assistance he requires." She turned to Theron. "Maintain evacuation protocols, but delay royal yacht departure. I want hull integrity sensors monitoring that section in real time." "Your Majesty, I must protest. Your protest is noted and overruled." She met Theron's eyes. That human just walked past a royal security detail towards certain death with a toolbox and tape. Either he is insane, or he knows something our engineers do not. I intend to discover which. Martinez was already moving before Vex could respond, his boots ringing against the deck plating as he jogged toward the breach. The guard captain exchanged a single look with his queen, a look that conveyed 1,000 words about duty, protocol, and the madness of trusting aliens with the queen's life, then followed. Lysara watched them disappear around the corner. The Klaxons continued their wail. The deck continued its ominous shuddering. Every instinct screamed at her to board the royal yacht and let the ship's fate unfold without her. Instead, she followed the human. Captain Theron's protest died unspoken as his queen walked calmly toward the disaster, with 5 royal guards forming a protective wedge around her. Protocol demanded her safety above all else. But Protocol had not anticipated a human contractor who looked at certain death and saw a problem to be solved in 4 minutes. The corridor temperature dropped as they approached the breach, the ship's environmental system struggling against the void, trying to claw its way inside. Lysara's breath misted in the air. Through the emergency bulkhead's viewport, she could see Martinez already at work, his hands moving with swift precision, while Vex stood frozen in obvious disbelief. The human was pressing silver tape directly onto a hull fracture, leaking starlight. And the impossible thing was starting to hold. The tape application looked wrong to every engineering instinct Lysara had developed across 4 decades of ship inspections. Martinez worked in overlapping strips, each piece pressed down with what seemed like casual pressure, building layers that grew thicker around the breach's epicenter. Frost formed on the tape's surface where vacuum cold met atmospheric warmth. The material should have frozen brittle and shattered. Instead, it flexed and held. Hull integrity showing 0.7% improvement. Theron's voice crackled through Lysara's calm implant, disbelief making each word careful. 0.9%. Your Majesty, the atmospheric leak is slowing. Martinez didn't pause. His movements carried the rhythm of someone who had done this exact repair 1,000 times, muscle memory transcending conscious thought. He pulled a small heating device from his toolbox, something that looked cobbled together from spare parts, and ran it along the tape's edges. The material bonded to the hull with a hiss that Lysara could hear even through the bulkhead's thick insulation. "Vex, report," she commanded. The guard captain's voice came through tight with confusion. "Your Majesty, he is... The structural damage appears to be stabilizing. I don't understand how. The tape shouldn't have sufficient molecular adhesion to... But it does," Lysara finished. She watched Martinez move to a second breach point, this one smaller but positioned dangerously close to a power conduit cluster. His hands never hesitated. How much time has elapsed? 2 minutes 40 seconds. The human had promised 4 minutes. He was ahead of schedule while performing the engineering equivalent of stopping a plasma leak with hope and instinct. "Your Majesty," Theron's voice carried into urgency, "I'm reading fluctuation in the antimatter containment field. Whatever he's doing is affecting the structural load distribution. If he applies too much material..." "Martinez." Lysara activated the bulkhead's internal comm. The human's head snapped up, and for the first time she saw genuine surprise cross his features. He hadn't expected the Queen herself to follow him to the breach site. "The containment field is fluctuating. Does your repair account for load redistribution?" Martinez stared at her through the viewport for a heartbeat. Then he looked at the tape in his hands, at the whole section he'd just reinforced, and understanding flickered across his face. "Shit." The word lacked any pretense of protocol. "Yeah, I see it. Tape's too rigid in this cold. I'm basically building a second hull that can't flex with the original. Give me 30 seconds. He dropped to one knee, ripping open his toolbox with enough force to send tools scattering across the deck. His hands emerged with a small aerosol canister. He began spraying something along the tape's inner edges, working with frantic precision. What is he doing now? Theron sounded like a scholar watching someone rewrite fundamental physics, adapting. Lysara felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest.
Not fear, recognition.
She had seen this quality before in her best battlefield commanders, the ability to perceive the problem behind the problem and pivot instantly. The human sprayed the last section and stood back. For 3 seconds it felt eternal, nothing changed. Then the hull sensors showed the load distribution evening out, the strain spreading across the repaired section in patterns that made the ship's structural integrity algorithms recalculate their failure predictions. 4 minutes, Martinez announced, his breath coming in visible clouds. "Clock me," Theron's voice came through, stunned. "Atmospheric leak has stopped. Hull integrity is holding at 90% of nominal in the affected section. The containment field is stabilized." A pause. "This is impossible. Permission to extract trapped personnel," Vex requested. "Granted." "Move quickly." Lysara kept her eyes on Martinez. The human had slumped against the wall, his face pale with exhaustion and cold exposure. "And bring that contractor with you. Your Majesty, the royal yacht. Can wait another 10 minutes while I speak with the man who just saved my flagship with tape and improvisation. She turned from the viewport. Captain Theron, I want a full materials analysis of that repair. And find out what else humans consider temporary that exceeds our permanent solutions. She began walking back toward the command deck, her guards falling into formation. Behind her, she heard the emergency bulkhead cycling open, heard Vex's clipped commands as rescue teams mobilized toward the trapped crew. 93 souls who would return to their families because a human contractor had looked at an impossible problem and seen a 4-minute repair job. The implications troubled her. The Vathran Empire had built its power on superior technology, unmatched engineering, and 3 millennia of accumulated knowledge. They had invited humans into their space as junior partners, primitives who might someday reach Vathran heights if properly guided. But Martinez hadn't used Vathran technology. He had used human ingenuity in something that cost less than a single credit per roll. Your Majesty. Theron caught up to her at the command deck entrance. The human is requesting permission to check his other repair sites. Apparently he has 17 similar patches throughout the ship's systems. 17. Lasara felt her scales rise despite her control. How many of those are on critical systems? All of them, Your Majesty. He's been maintaining sections our engineering crews marked as low priority due to resource constraints, using his own materials in free time. Theron's third arm gestured helplessly. We never noticed because the repairs kept functioning. The implications crystallized. Humans didn't just solve impossible problems. They solved them quietly, efficiently, with whatever materials were available, while the superior species overlooked the solutions happening beneath their notice. Bring him to my private conference room when the medical team clears him, Lasara commanded. And Theron, when you conduct that materials analysis, I want you to catalog every human solution we've dismissed as primitive, every shortcut we've ignored because it didn't match our protocols. Your Majesty? Because if their tape can save a flagship, I need to know what else we've been too proud to notice. She entered the command deck, where dozens of officers stood in various states of shock and relief. And I suspect the answer will be profoundly uncomfortable. Martinez arrived 40 minutes later, wrapped in a thermal blanket and carrying a cup of something that smelled astringent. The medical team had treated him for first-stage frostbite and mild decompression exposure. He still looked irritated, as though being summoned by royalty was interrupting more important work. Lasara dismissed her guards. Protocol dictated their presence, but protocol hadn't saved her ship. Sit, she commanded, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Martinez sat, cradling his cup with hands that trembled slightly from cold exposure. Your repair is holding. Yeah, it'll hold for weeks if nobody screws with it. Martinez took a sip of his drink. Longer if someone remembers to reinforce the edges when the tape starts degrading. Our chief engineer estimates the repair would cost approximately 2 million credits, using standard procedures. How much did your materials cost? For that breach? Maybe 15 credits. Martinez's expression remained flat. 20 if you count the heating unit, but I built that from spare parts 3 years ago. 15 credits. Lasara let the words hang in the air. To save a 1 billion credit vessel, math checks out. The human's tone suggested he had better places to be than discussing obvious facts with royalty.
Lasara leaned forward.
How did you know the tape would work? Because tape always works. Martinez set down his cup. Your Majesty, I've been fixing ships for 20 years. Started on colony transports when I was 15. The fancy materials, the certified procedures, the 1 million credit solutions, they're great when you have time and resources. But when people are dying and you've got 4 minutes, you use what works. And duct tape works. Duct tape, zip ties, wire hangers, and creative swearing. A ghost of a smile crossed Martinez's face. The universe doesn't care about your certification ratings. Physics cares about whether your solution holds pressure and distributes load. Everything else is just expensive confidence. The words should have sounded like arrogance. Instead, they carried the weight of hard-won knowledge. I reviewed your service record, Lasara continued. You filed 43 repair requests over the past year. All were denied due to budget constraints. 47, actually. 4 got lost in the bureaucracy. Martinez's jaw tightened. I stopped filing after that. Easier to just fix things myself. Using materials our engineers consider beneath their expertise. Using materials that cost less than the forms I'd have to fill out. The human's eyes met hers directly, and Lasara saw the frustration beneath his careful control. Your Majesty, with respect, this ship has had 17 critical failures waiting to happen for the past 8 months. I fixed them because nobody else would. Not because they couldn't, but because the solutions weren't impressive enough to justify the paperwork. The accusation landed like a physical blow. Lysara felt her secondary plates flush with the heat of recognition. How many other disasters had been prevented by contractors using tape and improvisation while her certified engineers debated proper procedures? Guard Captain Vex tells me you didn't hesitate at the breach site. You knew the Queen's security detail would try to stop you. Yeah, I figured. Martinez shrugged. Also figured you'd either shoot me or get out of the way. Either way, I had 93 people to extract. You risked execution for crew you've never met. I risked protocol violations for people who were going to die if someone didn't move. The distinction came sharp and immediate. Your security detail was doing their job. I was doing mine. Sometimes those jobs conflict. Lysara stood and walked to the viewport overlooking the main hangar. Below, rescue teams were bringing out the trapped crew members, their relief visible even from this distance. All 93 accounted for alive because a human had prioritized speed over perfection. How many other humans think like you, she asked. Most of us, when it matters. Martinez joined her at the viewport. It's not special, Your Majesty. It's just human. We come from a world that tried really hard to kill us, so we learned to fix things fast with whatever was lying around. The fancy stuff came later, after we'd already survived with duct tape and stubbornness. And you believe this approach is superior to our methods? I think both approaches have their place. Martinez's voice softened slightly. Your engineers could build a repair that lasts centuries. I built one that lasted long enough. The trick is knowing which one you need and having the humility to use both. Humility. The word struck deeper than any accusation of pride. Lysara had built her reign on certainty, on the knowledge that Vathran methods represented the pinnacle of civilization. She had welcomed humans as primitives who needed guidance. But Martinez hadn't needed guidance to save her ship. He had needed permission to be competent. I'm assigning you to the Royal Engineering Oversight Committee, she announced. Full authority to implement solutions regardless of cost or protocol restrictions. Martinez turned to stare at her. Your Majesty, I'm a third-class contractor. I'm not qualified. You saved my flagship with 15 credits of tape while my qualified engineers predicted catastrophic failure. She met his gaze with the full weight of her authority. You are now qualified by royal decree. Theron will provide whatever resources and support you require. Captain Theron is going to hate this. Captain Theron will adapt. Lysara allowed herself a slight smile, as will every engineer who has grown too comfortable with expensive solutions. You will teach them what humans understand about necessity. Martinez was quiet for a long moment. And if I implement something that violates Vathran engineering standards, then I expect you to document why the standards were insufficient and what practical solution succeeded instead. She returned to her desk, the decision made and immutable. I am not asking you to abandon proper engineering. I am commanding you to prevent the next disaster my proper engineers fail to address because they're debating certification requirements. You're asking me to teach humility to people who've spent their lives learning superiority. I'm asking you to show them that survival sometimes requires setting aside pride. Lysara's voice carried the steel of absolute authority. And if they refuse, you will implement the solutions anyway under my direct authorization. The human studied her with an intensity that would have earned a lesser being immediate detention. Then he nodded once, sharp and final. Understood, Your Majesty, but I'm going to need a bigger toolbox. You'll have access to the Royal Supply Depot. Order whatever materials you require. And unlimited duct tape? Lysara felt her secondary plates ripple with something that might have been amusement. Unlimited tape and whatever other primitive solutions you deem necessary. I'm authorizing a discretionary budget of 500,000 credits per quarter. That's insane. I could fix this entire ship 3 times over for that. Then fix it once properly and document the surplus for future emergencies. She stood, signaling the end of the audience. I want a full assessment of every critical system by week's end. Prioritize the disasters that would embarrass our engineers most if discovered. Martinez stood as well, the thermal blanket falling away to reveal his tool-stained uniform beneath. He looked like exhaustion personified. Your Majesty, I need to check those 17 other patches before I start cataloging new problems. Granted, but Martinez? She waited until he met her eyes. Thank you for the 4 minutes, and for showing me where our pride has created blind spots. The human's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Just doing my job, ma'am, though I appreciate it finally involving less paperwork than actual repair work. He left, taking his empty cup and his unshakable competence with him. Lysara watched him go and felt the shape of her empire shift. Not a collapse, an adjustment. a recognition that superior technology meant nothing without the practical wisdom to use it appropriately. Her comm implant chimed. Captain Theron, requesting urgent audience. "Enter," she called, knowing the protest before it began. Theron stepped through the door with his third arm raised in formal objection. "Your Majesty, I must protest the appointment of a civilian contractor to the Royal Engineering Committee. The breach of protocol saved 93 lives while protocol debated proper procedures." Lysara cut through the objection with surgical precision. "Tell me, Captain, if I had followed standard evacuation protocols, where would I be right now?" "Safely aboard the royal yacht, Your Majesty." "And the flagship?" Theron's scales paled. "Lost with all hands. The antimatter containment would have failed within minutes of your departure. Martinez gave us 23 minutes, more than he promised." Using materials that cost less than this conversation." She let the implications settle. "How many engineers do we have aboard who could have matched that?" "None, Your Majesty. The solution he implemented wasn't in any of our procedural manuals. We would have continued attempting to manufacture proper hull plates until the containment failed. Then perhaps our manuals are incomplete." Lysara's voice softened slightly. "I'm not dismissing your expertise, Theron. I'm expanding the definition of expertise to include solutions that work over solutions that look impressive on certification records. But the engineering committee has standards. The engineering committee has blind spots." She moved to the window again, looking at her ship's hull where frost still marked the breach location. "Martinez found 17 critical failures we missed because they didn't justify expensive repairs. 17 disasters prevented by tape and improvisation while we debated proper resource allocation. If I may speak freely, Your Majesty, you may. The other engineers will resist. They'll see this as an insult to their training and expertise." Theron's third arm gestured helplessly. "Humans are respected as allies, but they're seen as junior partners. Bringing one onto the Royal Committee suggests that their methods equal ours. Their methods saved my life today." Lysara's voice carried absolute finality. "If that insults our engineers' pride, then their pride needs adjustment. I would rather have living crew members and tape-repaired hulls than perfect engineering and memorial services." Theron was silent for a long moment. "How should I frame this to the committee?" "Tell them that I have appointed Martinez as special advisor for practical engineering solutions. His mandate is to identify and resolve problems that fall through procedural gaps. He reports directly to me and has authority to implement emergency repairs without committee approval. They'll demand limits on his authority. Then they'll be disappointed." Lysara turned to face Theron fully. "I'm done losing battles to our own bureaucracy. Martinez proved that sometimes the fastest solution is the best solution, even if it involves materials we consider beneath our dignity. I intend to institutionalize that lesson before our pride kills more people than our enemies." "Yes, Your Majesty." Terran's posture straightened into formal acceptance. "I'll schedule the committee briefing for tomorrow morning. Tonight. I want everyone present to see the breach Martinez repaired while they were calculating failure probabilities." She smiled without humor. "Sometimes seeing the impossible makes it easier to accept new possibilities." Theron departed, leaving Lysara alone with her thoughts and the quiet hum of her flagship systems. Somewhere in those systems, tape held back vacuum. Somewhere in those corridors, a human walked with his toolbox and his pragmatic competence, checking patches that shouldn't work but did. She pulled up Martinez's full-service record on her private terminal. 20 years of experience across a dozen ships and stations. Consistent performance ratings of adequate and meets minimum standards. 47 repair requests filed and denied. Not a single commendation for the 17 disasters he'd quietly prevented. The pattern was clear. The Vathran Empire had looked at human ingenuity and seen primitive solutions. They had filed Martinez's expertise under temporary measures and focused their resources on expensive perfection. How many other humans had they overlooked? How many practical solutions had been dismissed because they came wrapped in tape instead of certification seals? The questions troubled her through the night cycle as her ship maintained its orbit through newly stable systems. The engineering committee meeting came at dawn, gathering 24 of the Empire's finest minds in her primary conference chamber. They stood in perfect rows, their formal robes gleaming with achievement medals and rank insignia. Martinez arrived in his work uniform, carrying a toolbox and looking profoundly uncomfortable. "Thank you for attending," Lysara began, her voice carrying the weight of command. Yesterday, this ship suffered a catastrophic hull breach that threatened antimatter containment. Standard procedures predicted total loss within 12 minutes. This human prevented that loss using materials that cost 15 credits and violated every engineering protocol we maintain. She gestured to the display behind her, showing sensor footage of Martinez's repair work. I have appointed him as Special Advisor for Practical Engineering Solutions. He will identify and resolve system failures that fall outside standard procedural responses. His authority supersedes committee approval in emergency situations. The silence that followed carried the texture of professional offense. Senior Engineer Cavrix broke it first, his voice carefully modulated. Your Majesty, with utmost respect, emergency situations require tested solutions implemented by certified professionals. This human's success was fortunate, but fortune is not methodology. His fortune involved knowing exactly which materials to use, how to apply them, and how to adapt when initial parameters changed. Lasar's gaze swept the assembly. How many of you could have matched that performance? No one answered. Martinez, she turned to the human. Explain your methodology. The contractor stepped forward, setting his toolbox on the conference table with a thunk that made several engineers flinch. The breach was radiating fractures through a hull section that had been stressed by repeated maintenance delays. Standard plate replacement would have required 18 hours minimum and created additional stress points during installation. I needed something that would seal immediately, flex with the existing structure, and distribute load without adding significant mass. He opened the toolbox and pulled out the roll of tape. This is aluminum-backed polyethylene with pressure-sensitive adhesive. Costs almost nothing, applies in seconds, and handles temperature extremes from -200 to +80 Celsius. It's not perfect, but perfect wasn't the mission requirement. Fast and functional was the requirement, and this delivered both. But such materials have no structural certification, another engineer objected. How can we trust solutions that haven't been tested to our standards? Because your standards are designed for permanence, not emergency response. Martinez's voice remained flat but firm. I'm not suggesting we replace proper engineering. I'm suggesting we stop treating every problem like it needs a permanent solution when a temporary fix saves lives. The distinction seems arbitrary, Cavrix pressed. Today's temporary fix becomes tomorrow's permanent compromise. Standards exist for reasons. Standards exist to prevent disasters, not to create them through bureaucratic paralysis. Martinez pulled out a datapad. I've logged 47 repair requests over the past year. Average processing time was 6 weeks. Approval rate was 0%. During that time, I identified 17 critical failures that would have killed crew members if left unresolved, so I resolved them myself using materials I bought with my own money because waiting for your standards to approve action meant watching people die. The room went very quiet. Show me, Lasar commanded. Martinez activated the datapad, projecting a map of the ship's systems. Red indicators bloomed across multiple decks, life support junctions, coolant conduits, pressure seals, emergency bulkhead mechanisms, each one marked with a repair date and materials used. Zip ties on coolant conduit supports Deck 7. Your mounting brackets were corroding, but the replacement order was flagged as low priority. Failure would have vented superheated plasma into crew quarters. Wire and sealant on the emergency bulkhead actuator, Deck 12. The hydraulic line was leaking, but not enough to trigger automatic warnings. Complete failure would have prevented evacuation during decompression events. Tape and epoxy on the atmospheric scrubber housing, Deck 4. The seal was degrading but within acceptable tolerances according to your sensors. Except your sensors measure average performance, not worst-case failure points. That seal would have split during the next pressure spike and poisoned 80 people with carbon dioxide. Each revelation landed like a physical blow. The engineers shifted uncomfortably, their perfect postures crumbling under the weight of invisible disasters prevented by tape and improvisation. How much did these repairs cost? Lasara asked quietly. Total? Maybe 200 credits over 12 months. Martinez closed the projection. Your replacement parts would have cost approximately 4.7 million credits and required 3 months of installation time, during which any of these systems could have failed and killed the people they were designed to protect. This is unacceptable, Cavrix managed. That these failures existed undetected. They were detected, Martinez interrupted. I detected them and reported them. You just didn't consider them worth addressing until they became catastrophic. Because catastrophic failures justify expensive solutions, and expensive solutions justify your existence. The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Advisor Martinez. Lissara's voice carried warning. You will maintain professional courtesy. Apologies, Your Majesty. Martinez's jaw tightened. But the question stands. If your engineers are too focused on perfect solutions to implement good enough solutions, what exactly are they engineering? Safety or their own importance? That is enough, Lissara commanded. But she didn't disagree. She turned to Cavrix. How many other critical systems currently fall below replacement thresholds but above failure risks? The senior engineer's scales had gone pale. I would need to conduct a full audit. Then conduct one. Martinez will accompany your teams and identify any systems he has already repaired through improvised methods. She looked at the assembly of perfect professionals with their perfect credentials. And I expect every engineer present to shadow Martinez for 1 week, learn what he knows about emergency responses. Because apparently our standards have created a situation where tape outperforms certified excellence. Your Majesty, Cavrix tried again. Surely you don't mean to suggest that improvised solutions should become standard practice. I mean to suggest that when 93 lives hang on 4 minutes of work, I don't care if the solution comes wrapped in certification seals or duct tape. Her voice could have cut whole plating. Martinez saved this ship while you would have been convening emergency committees and debating material specifications. That tells me our standards need adjustment. She stood, signaling the meeting's end. You have 1 week to audit every system Martinez has touched, document his methodologies, analyze his solutions, and provide recommendations for incorporating practical emergency responses into our procedural manuals. If his tape holds better than your pride, I expect you to learn from it. The engineers filed out in subdued silence. Martinez remained, his expression unreadable. That was harsh, Lissara observed once they were alone. That was necessary, Your Majesty. Martinez closed his toolbox. Those engineers aren't incompetent. They're overspecialized. They spent so long learning the right way to solve problems that they've forgotten sometimes the right way takes too long. Someone needed to say it, and now they'll resent you for it. Probably. The human shrugged. But they'll also think twice before rejecting a repair request because it doesn't meet aesthetic standards. That's worth some resentment. Lissara studied him. This contractor who had walked into certain death with a toolbox and emerged as the architect of institutional change. Why did you really go to that breach? You could have evacuated with everyone else. Martinez was quiet for a moment. My sister died in a decompression accident when I was 17. Station engineers had flagged her sector's seals as degraded but acceptable. They were planning a full replacement during the next maintenance cycle. His hands tightened on the toolbox handle. The seals failed 3 weeks before that cycle. She and 47 others suffocated while certified professionals debated proper procedures. I'm sorry. I'm angry. The words came flat and honest. I've been angry for 20 years. Every time I see a failure waiting to happen, every time someone prioritizes perfection over prevention, I see my sister gasping for air that never came. So yeah, I go into the breaches. Because maybe if someone had been willing to slap tape on those seals and buy 3 more weeks, she'd still be here. The truth settled between them, heavy and irrefutable. This wasn't about tape or engineering standards. It was about the space between disaster and prevention, filled by people willing to act while others debated proper responses. Stay on my staff, Lissara said, not as an advisor, as my chief of emergency engineering. Same authority, better resources, and the explicit mandate to prevent disasters using whatever methods work fastest, that's going to create political problems. Your engineers already think I'm an arrogant primitive. Then they'll learn to value arrogant primitives who save their lives. She met his eyes. I need someone who sees problems and fixes them, not someone who sees problems and schedules meetings. The Empire has enough meeting schedulers. Martinez nodded slowly. I'll need access to all ship systems, authority to implement repairs without approval delays, and a bigger budget than you're probably comfortable with. You'll have all 3. Name your requirements. Unlimited duct tape, obviously. A ghost of humor touched his expression. But also training programs. If you want other engineers to think like humans, they need to understand why we think this way. And that means teaching them to see problems as opportunities instead of threats to procedural integrity. Design the curriculum. I'll make it mandatory for all engineering personnel. Lissara pulled up her private terminal, already drafting the appointment orders. What else? Give me 4 human engineers from the contractor pool. People who've been doing what I do, fixing things quietly with improvised solutions because the official channels take too long. They'll form the core training team. Done. Anything else? Martinez smiled, and for the first time it reached his eyes. Yeah. Tell Captain Theron his maintenance approval system is being replaced with something that prioritizes speed over paperwork. Because if I have to file another 47 requests that go nowhere, I'm going to start taping his office door shut on principle. I'll inform him his pride is being adjusted for practical purposes. Lysara allowed herself a slight smile in return. Welcome to the Royal Staff, Chief Martinez. Try not to horrify too many senior engineers on your first day. No promises, Your Majesty, but I'll keep the tape budget reasonable. He left, taking his toolbox and his practical competence with him. Lysara watched him go and felt the shape of her empire shift again. Not a collapse, an evolution, a recognition that true strength lay not in perfection, but in the pragmatic wisdom to act when action mattered most. Somewhere in her flagship's corridors, tape held back vacuum. Somewhere in her empire's future, that tape would become a symbol, not of primitive solutions, but of the human understanding that survival required setting aside pride and embracing whatever worked. And if her engineers learned that lesson, if they carried it forward into every crisis and disaster that awaited, then perhaps Martinez's sister hadn't died for nothing. Perhaps her suffocation in that station had planted seeds that grew into a garden of practical salvation, or tape and improvisation stood equal with certification and procedure. The universe didn't care about their pride. It only cared whether their solutions held pressure and distributed load. Everything else was just expensive confidence waiting to fail when it mattered most, and Lysara was done betting lives on confidence when tape and competence offered better odds.